Welcome to Between Two Clinicians, the podcast that gives you a backstage pass into the mind of two therapists. I'm Talia.
I'm Adam Luke. We've spent years helping others navigate the complexities of their minds and relationships.
In this podcast, we're flipping the script, and we're sharing our own unfiltered insights. No topic is off limits, and no issue too taboo. We're ready to tackle the tough stuff with honesty and empathy. Let's dive in.
Well, howdy.
Welcome to another episode of Between Two Clinicians. Listeners, today's topic is brought to you by TikTok, my not least favorite. I have a love-hate relationship. Had I learned it, instead of being so turned off by all the dances and being vehemently opposed to having to do that as a source of marketing years ago, I probably would like TikTok a lot more. So I have to get past that. But I learned about this thing called Creator Insights, where you can reverse engineer topics that people are wanting to know about. So one of the ones that Adam and I thought was interesting was the one on Soulmates. Soulmates Explained, and coming from two therapists, I think this will be a pretty dynamic topic. So we have a few talking points there, and then we have an Am I the Asshole Reddit post to discuss both of our immediate takes on, and then we have a host hot seat question, which we both picked. And we are very excited for that, and could probably list a few answers. Can't wait. So we will dive right in to what do you think, and then I can go after. I can go first. How would you define a soulmate? Do they exist? Is probably the next one after that. But like, how would you define it, and how would you differentiate it from like what is the other trending word, twin flame?
I feel like there's three of them, right? There's soulmates, twin flames, love of my life.
Yeah.
And, all three of them probably have the same definition. And it's like that person that feels like they're your puzzle piece. You feel like you click in together and that something is created. This relationship comes out of it. You just feel like this person can finish your sentences. And, it's an interesting component because it does feel like this other part of you. Where I jump in this definition, though, is that like, this doesn't mean that the relationship is easier. No. I do feel like I've met people who their relationship and their oneness, their growth together has happened over periods of time. And then you have people that can meet and, spend that first 5 or 10 minutes of a blind date and be like, holy shit, this is the person that I want for me. Right. But the reality is that you're probably not blessed more by meeting your soulmate or not meeting your soulmate, because just because there's a high level of compatibility doesn't mean that there's a lack of needed investment in energy, time, diligence. So that's sort of my take on soulmates. They exist. Absolutely. I believe they exist. Doesn't mean that it's easier.
Yeah, I have a maybe more contrarian take that I don't see. I'm torn because I know too much. That I think the idea, and what I mean by that is I've learned too much in psychoanalysis to feel that same warm, fuzzy, like, oh my gosh, like Disney princess level of like, they're the one. I'm jaded, obviously, if that wasn't apparent before in any other episode, that there's this, I used to think there was like a one person that you would eventually find and build with. And that also informed, not only for me, but it informed the way I looked at the world of like, oh, well, it made sense that so-and-so didn't end up together. Even when I was little and like kids' parents wouldn't be together, it's like, oh, it made sense that so-and-so didn't end up together because it wasn't their soulmate. Or it was a more like palatable way to look at it, rather than like, as an adult now I understand the back end of it, but as a kid I'm like, oh, it's just because it wasn't their soulmate. Or we're like predestined to find that one person, and no matter what, we're going to get through it no matter what, at any cost. And again, there's a healthy spin on that, and there's also an unhealthy spin on that. So when I think of soulmates, I think of it as this like ethereal predestination where like your DNA is encoded to like find each other one day. Obviously there's factors that go into like timing, geographical location, being in the right place at the right time, and effort, as you mentioned. And that to me differs from like the twin flame, which is usually, in my view, like more of the unhealthy, like your inner children are soulmates in a way, but your adult selves are like a nightmare to be with, because it's all the unfinished business
The most
from your
common way
childhood.
that people have heard of twin flames is, if you have vials of each other's bloods around your neck.
Yes, right. It's like a weird seance level bond where it's like nothing can separate us, like blood oath. Like it's more of that like edgy. That's how I define it. I could be wrong. I'm open to being wrong. Obviously, that's just my one opinion on it.
Is
Like
the
the twin
more
flame is,
dangerous levels of the
yeah,
Tinder sphere.
yes, it's edgy. It's edgy, but there's something about it that feels like so wrong. It's right, but
Yeah.
like it's so painful. But like
Mm,
love is supposed to be pain. Like there's this, it's like a toxic narrative. I think that's where
yeah.
I think twin flame, and then love of my life. That's one I think you can have multiples of,
Mm,
because you grow into hopefully so many different versions of yourself along
absolutely.
the way. The ideal is that the partner you chose the day of whatever your
Mm,
ceremony was, whether it's a wedding or a commitment, what have you, like the day you made the agreement, you're my person.
yeah.
You ideally fall in love with each other's different versions, and you reinvent multiple loves of your life within one
Mm,
person. However, as you and I know as therapists, due to at least a few off the top of my head factors, either willingness or unwillingness to grow and change,
hmm
comfort or discomfort with that growth or change, and then fear of what
absolutely.
happens if we change, what happens if we don't change. Well, I just got comfortable in this, I don't really want to grow more. Like you met me
Mm,
at my ceiling, and maybe it was someone's floor, and you're growing, and you look backward one day and you're like, where are you going? And they're like, no, I'm happy here. Like complacency.
yep.
That sometimes the love of your life
Mm,
has a open and closed chapter, and then you meet another different phase love of your life.
hmm
So ideally it's one person you grow with, but sometimes that's not realistic, because how much you
no.
both grow and change is also dependent upon if it's in the same direction or not. And if too much has happened that gets in the way, I talked about this on another podcast last week, if too much has happened that's gotten in the way of the foundation of a relationship,
Mm,
non-romantically, but like trust, regard, respect, communication, like if that can't even be attained,
yeah.
then chances are that it's time to close the chapter on like love
Well
of
said.
your life. So they exist, but there's to me
Mm,
a lot of nuance for it. So that's like my definitions and differentiation. And then I can go in like more in depth from a psychoanalytic perspective, that a lot of it is more about your subconscious. It's like transference, it's the
mm,
Oedipal complex, it's your internal object relations. Like there's some points where it's those, how your early attachment relationships went. The soulmate might be somebody who provides the secure base that you never had, or that you did have
hmm
growing up that you still want. And they either mirror that safety and security, or they create it for you because you never had someone to mirror that. So
correct.
it's more likely your subconscious picking and
Mm,
attuning to this person that's like, you can help me escape from my childhood. That's how I like to word it to my delusional with love, said with love college students who are like, but I didn't find my soulmate. I'm like, really? Chad and Sigma Chi wasn't you're the one doing flabongo things at the frat party? I'm shocked.
yeah.
I'm,
You mean
I'm
the
so disheartened I
Torah
won't be at the
party
wedding.
was
Yeah.
not the like
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Classic.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I just think that, like, I guess where my jadedness comes in this is that we've tweaked this idea of soulmates or twin flames or loves of our lives to be something that's like a one shot wonder, when I don't
Right. Right.
it's not. I hate to break it to
Right.
you. It's the fact that, like, I believe that most of the relationships we get into, as long as they start from a healthy position, can end up being any one or all three of those things. And I've seen it before with, like, working with my widowers and my widows. Like, there's individuals who have lost legitimately the loves of their life and then have gone out and found the next love of their life.
Exactly.
Like, so
Yeah.
this idea that it's like the one and done, um, I think that that also puts this artificial pressure on the relationship that's also not good for the relationship. So,
Hmm.
because guess what? The person who is the love of my life can also still hurt me, and we can still be a resilient in a relationship because of it.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean that we never fight. And what we actually find out is the relationships where people never fight are the ones that are more likely to end up in divorce, anyways. I'll never forget a couple that came in and sat down with me. They'd done 25 years of life together. They had made the decision early on that they didn't want to have kids, but they had built several businesses. They became very successful. And then they said, we're here because we think we want a divorce. And I was like, as a therapist, you're like,
Well, yeah, calmly worded. I'm intrigued.
you're
Say more.
allowed? I
Yeah.
like, what do
Yeah.
you, they're like, well, no, is it weird? And then we started going down the list of like, well, let's talk about what is weird. And
Yeah.
it really came out to the fact that they're like, yeah, the companionship has been great, but we want to go different ways in our life. And the one thing that the wife had brought up is like, we never fight. And she's like,
Mm,
so we either don't give a shit, or we're checked out, or like what, because nothing bothers us. And we have actually set it up so that most of our lives are doing vacations without each
right.
other. And
Right.
it's like, oh, okay. But from the outside in, everyone was probably going like, oh my gosh, they've got this baller house, they drive new cars, they've got all these businesses. Oh man, that's the life.
Right.
Oh, they were great teammates, but then they recognize like there's something even past that.
I think it reminds me of Sternberg's triangular theory of love, where there's the triangle. So it's liking at the top,
Okay.
empty love. Like if it's there's liking, like intimacy, passion, and commitment, and consummate love has all three. So when people describe soulmates, often they're describing all three, obviously, for
Yeah.
the love of their life. Or if it's that twin flame, usually I think of that as like the intimacy and passion, that
Yeah.
romantic love. So if you, we can link this in the show notes, but it's like intimacy is at the top and infatuation is the passion piece at the bottom of the triangle.
Yeah.
So if you just have those two, it's romantic love. If you just have passion and commitment, that's fatuous love. It doesn't often last. And then the intimacy, the liking, and the empty love of commitment, that's companionate love. So some couples have different parts of this at different phases of their relationship. The goal is that integrated consummate love where you have that intimacy, passion, and commitment, which, like you're saying, takes effort, it takes intention. And some couples never really had it in the beginning, but the other parts of the relationship were why they were in it. That was their buy-in, and that was the most fulfilling.
Yep.
And not everybody gets married or partners for life or phases of life, whatever, for the same reasons. Sometimes
Correct.
we know that ahead of time. Sometimes we discover that along the way of like, oh, we don't have the same purpose. We don't have the same view. And that's where the definition of like that love of your life, your life can go in so many different directions, and the type of love based on Sternberg's theory can look different when you've just had kids, when you're empty nesters, when you're about to start a family, when you're traveling, when you just met. You're at a different season and phase of your life. It takes time, energy, and effort to grow and to build whatever you want your love to look like, whether it's your soulmate or not. And I wouldn't recommend people rely solely on the soulmate theory, because there's reality that hits. And that's another part of analysis, is like there's an illusion and a delusion, an idealization of this partner. They're all the parts and the Oedipal complex, right? If I marry somebody successfully who has the traits of my opposite sex parent, but it goes better, then I resolve the complex. Like there's something motivating you unconsciously and subconsciously to not only find a soulmate, pick a soulmate, but have the belief there's only one person out there for me, I think is limiting. Now, I'm more of a monogamist, if you will. I have worked with poly couples. I understand it for sure. But with my couples that I mainly work with and in my own personal life, at least currently, so far, that's the view that I have. And I understand that there's different needs to be met, but you have to look at, again, what is the cause of the choice to partner with that one person. If it's solely, I've worked with many individuals who are now divorcing in their 30s. They did all the things on the list. I found my love of my life early. We got married young. We had kids. We did the career. And then they're feeling wildly unfulfilled and empty in their own lives because it's not what they really wanted. It's what society sold them is what love is like. Oh, it's your soulmate. Oh, it's the one and only. Like, you'll be together 50 years. Well, marriage could be an endurance race, which I don't recommend, or it could be a very leisurely stroll along the beach. If it's the same amount of time, what do you want it to feel like? And so many couples are like, well, we were married 50 years. Was it happy or not? I'm more interested in that. I don't care about how long it lasted. I care about the quality, not the quantity.
I think something you bring up there is a lot of times people come to assume that like marriage and suffering are at some level like synonymous. When it's like, well, no,
Acrimony, yeah.
suffering happens in marriage, but it's not a destination that we're striving to get to. Like, and well, a lot of people are suffering. Well, like, no, there's just grief that pops up. There is, and then there at times there's also grief and suffering that's caused because of relational issues. Like, but these things are going to happen in the relationship, and just the presence of them happening doesn't then automatically mean that we're not soulmates or we're not loves of each other's lives. But this is that like that sort of whimsical view of like, oh, well, those things don't come into our life because we're twin flamed. And then that's the problem that people have is they have to reconcile the reality with their expectations. And their expectation was, well, that's not supposed to happen to us. So now that that thing that I told myself was never going to happen is now here, that must mean
Right.
that this whole thing doesn't actually work. So, like, if anything, congratulations if you have found someone that you're extremely compatible with. Now don't get complacent and lazy.
Hmm.
Like, because I've watched that as well where, like, partners will come together and all of a sudden there's a high level of compatibility. Like, the yin and yang effect is happening. They work amazing as teams, and then all of a sudden, that intimacy part, like, the foot comes off the throttle, right? Like, we
Hmm.
start
Hmm.
and this is what's the interesting part, is just because it feels good doesn't mean that you stop doing the hard work. So, I think that's where a lot of couples get, especially I see this with empty nesters, as they launch all the kiddos, the house is paid for, the
Hmm.
401k exists, all
There's
these
no
things, and then they
striving.
look at each other and like, "Who the hell are you?" And it's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, yeah, well, we moved into, like, what I would consider our more basement traits," which is like, "Okay, so you're good with organization, I'm good with procuring money," or whatever this
Hmm.
might be, and then we spend 20 years doing this dance, and we forgot, well, hold it, we were supposed to be dating each other. We were supposed to be selfish. Like, that's the word I use the most with my couples, and
Yep.
they're always
Yep.
uncomfortable with it, is they'll tell me, "Oh, well, the kids doing this and the kids are doing that." I'm like, "So when are you going on an overnight trip? When are you gonna go on a date night?" "Oh, well, we got this, we got" "So?" Like, let's be honest, the kids didn't get here without you being able to be intimate. So if you're telling me that now they're here, you're going to pause that aspect of your life, how is that going to be a benefit to your relationship? Because when intimacy leaves a relationship, then all we really have is a partnership.
Hmm. That commitment.
Yeah.
Yeah. The companionate love,
Mhm.
like you were describing that. I think Sternberg like titled it that way, but it is, and for some couples, I will say it is what was modeled to them
Mm.
was a more companionate love.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that is the template that they go through life with of like, oh, marriages or life partnership, we'll just call it
Mhm.
that, because some people don't choose to get legally married. I have my own thoughts about that, coming from a divorce lawyer perspective, getting the government involved, so to speak. But
Yeah.
it's like, what is the template I have for lifelong commitment?
Mm.
What does it look like? And going backward in your family of origin, or I guess upward to your parents, but like
Yeah.
backward in time at the same time, like, where does my belief of what love should or shouldn't be,
Mm.
or relationships should or shouldn't look like, come from?
Yeah.
And that can also inform if you believe in soulmates or not, and to what degree you think that informs relationships and chemistry versus compatibility. I gave this example when I used to teach that chemistry is like when you try on clothes and you're like, oh my god, this shirt is so cute, it's the best thing ever, like
Mhm.
everyone's gonna think it's the best, whatever. And you get home and then you put it near your closet, you're like, I have nothing to wear with this. Like, it was only cute in the store. This is not compatible with anything else that I have. Like,
Yep.
it's akin to like, the partner's great for you, but if you are one who wants them to be in some level
Mhm.
included in your family, to travel, to hang out with your friends, involve them in your life in
Yeah.
some capacity, the chemistry you feel with one person doesn't always translate into them being compatible in all those other areas. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's just chemistry and it's only meant to be whatever, a fantasy or fleeting or what
Yeah.
have you. It doesn't always go to the compatibility piece. And there's ways that when you're highly compatible with somebody,
Mm.
even if that spark, quote unquote, or chemistry isn't
Yeah.
there, you can create it. In what ways do you see that
Agreed.
they're, maybe the guy isn't as tall as you would like? What other ways is he
Mm.
strong or manly? Or the girl isn't as, I'm trying to think of an example, like, I don't know, as fill in the blank, whatever desirable trait that you
Yeah.
want. What other ways can you be attracted to her? Like,
For sure.
if you don't love every single curve, or like it's not what you're used to, are there some curves you love? I guess is like another translation. It's not all about physical. It's just the
No.
first thing that came to my mind, that there is something to be said for creating and causing the chemistry and choosing to focus on what you are attracted to rather than only focus on what you're not attracted to. That speaks to your point. It takes effort in a long-term relationship when you have, whether it is the love of your life, you feel that as though they're your soulmate. The twin flame thing, I can just leave it. Like, if you're committed to this person and you want there to be passion and intimacy, there has to be an effort put into it that you can't neglect it. And like you said, one day wake up and be like, who are you? Who am I? What the fuck are we doing here? Is a common feeling most couples have because of, this is also why soulmates, the concept is a thing, media.
Yeah.
What did media show us or not show us about the reality of relationships? It also doesn't accurately portray sex or intimacy at all, because rarely, first of all, sex does not last hours and hours for the large majority of the population. Like penetrative intercourse, it doesn't last for hours. It hurts. That is not pleasant. First of all. Second of all, you don't both end at the same time perfectly in breathy ecstasy. Show me on the doll where that happens. Like, that's not going to happen. So it sets an unrealistic tone for not only love, but intimacy and romance and sex. And then we're all out here as adults trying to be like, well, why doesn't it feel like this illusion of what I was, I bought false goods. I was sold false goods. That's not what it is actually like. It's messy. It's complicated. It's chaotic.
Well, being sold
effortful.
False goods is also time for us to look back on like our own like introspection and be like, was I sold false goods, or did I buy onto a shitty assumption?
Or did I have too much of that fantasy and idealization and pedestalization of the partner for the sake of, I want my soulmate, that you looked past the red flags. You've put the gas pedal too much on chemistry and didn't look at the long-term compatibility of how they maybe fit in your life, or the sex was so good, right? We're eclipsed in one area that it's like, well, I'll figure out the rest later. Well, sex doesn't always exist. You and I both know this after, just having a child. Your body changes, your partner's body changes. It's so much different when family systems come into play and you're not just a dyad anymore, personally and professionally. What do couples come in with? We haven't had sex. The toughest years of a relationship are after the kids are born and when they're young. And the dissatisfaction is the highest in the first 3 years after having kids. If sex is all that keeps you together and that's what your soulmate is based on, you might want to try other activities together to see if you're also compatible, is what I'm going to say.
Well, and I think that, this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but relationships that are sort of cemented on the great sex principle sets us up for this trouble where, let's talk about sex itself in many ways. It's actually an individual experience, right? So like in a healthy relationship, yes, there is a collaboration, there's this mutual goal that we're both trying to reach orgasm, right? But at the same time, when we talk about like the Tinder hookups, we're each just trying to get our own. And so that's great that you found someone who, uses his crayons well, and you're like, all right, perfect.
Yeah.
We hit what we needed. That's wonderful. Now what happens afterwards? Because like the joke is, so after 15 minutes, what do you talk about? So this is the question, because if it is just the fantasy aspect of being able to share a good meal with each other, have amazing sex, high five out the door, and that's the relationship we have, what happens when you don't leave? What happens when, like you said, that thing that was the hallmark of the relationship isn't gone, but it's definitely put on the back burner, right? And like, are you willing to have non-performative sex? Like, is it okay if she doesn't have lingerie? Is it okay if you're also not, just out of the shower? Like, what happens when both of you have 15 more pounds on you? Like, where do we go there? Because so like that's my biggest thing as a couples therapist that I always call bullshit on, is when they're like, well, we fell out of love, or the sex isn't the same. Like, well, guess what?
Obviously,
the sex ain't going to be the same when you're 60 or 70 either.
No,
so like
no one promised you that it would be the same.
Correct.
I don't think I've never heard, I've heard the, like, I guess you could say the inverse of the messaging of like, oh, if it's not there, then something's wrong. But in no way, I maybe have missed the announcement publicly. I don't think anybody ever said, and if they did, it's inaccurate, that inverse
Yeah.
messaging is like, you should expect it to be different.
Mm-hmm.
You should expect there to be dry spells at times. Some couples agree to a sexless marriage because it's not a priority for them. Some couples have asexuality in one part. Like,
Yeah.
it is such a this could be a whole other episode, obviously,
It
but
could.
it's such a nuanced topic, and it needs to be talked about and addressed in the room. The top three topics that couples come in fighting about is, in maybe no particular order, money and finances, family systems, including in-laws and kids, and sex.
Hey there, listeners. Are you tired of settling for less than you deserve in your relationships? Do you ever feel like you're not being seen, heard, or valued the way that you want? Or maybe you've been wondering why you keep attracting the same kinds of people into your life, or why certain patterns seem to repeat themselves in your relationships. The answer might be deeper than you think, and you can find it in my new course. Rewire Your Relationships is a transformative course designed to help you stop settling for less than you deserve and start embodying your most confident, assertive, and authentic self in your relationships. You'll explore how your early experiences and parental influences have shaped your views on love, dating, and self-worth. This isn't just about tips and tricks for dating. It's about understanding the core beliefs that drive your relationships that you attract. You'll learn how to break free from those old patterns and start creating the kind of connections that truly reflect who you are. Imagine stepping into a relationship with clarity and confidence, knowing you're attracting people who value and respect you for who you really are, your deeply authentic self. The Rewire Your Relationship course gives you the tools to rewrite your relationship story, one where you're no longer settling, but thriving. Visit taliabombola.com/rewireyourrelationships or check the link in the show notes for more.
And so what's interesting though is, and this is where I want to encourage everyone that's listening here, all three of those could pop up and you're still soulmates. All three of those can pop up and you're still loves of each other's lives.
And
Like
make the
that
commitment to
there
be
is,
lifelong partners.
it's not like there's an Achilles heel here. And so that's where, like, again, I think that the joke out there is that, like, soulmates or forever after, that there is no level of discomfort, inconvenience, or challenge that shows up in the relationship. That's bullcrap. Like, but now you've got to ask, so how do we stay together? It's great that you found someone that you're highly compatible with. Now you're going to have to dig deep, because the first part has been really easy. When you do feel like you click in like that puzzle piece, that's wonderful. There's a part of you that's going to be like, oh, I can relax. Actually, you got to lean in. And you got to be like, okay, so where aren't the edges fitting the most cleanly or whatnot? Or let's dig a little deeper into, like, we're good at the surface level things, but I want to know more. We actually have the safety of being able to move quicker in the relationship to say, hey, I want to know you at that deepest, darkest, and not just at what you're willing to show when, you know, the lights turn on and the makeup's on and the you know, right
before
suit is on. Like,
there's I think a benefit to partners who choose, like you're saying, to lean into where aren't the pieces fitting. Not only lean into where it is fitting, that's easy and I would hope obvious in many relationships. Well, we like these things, so we do this. Okay, but can you have uncomfortable, I get that you can have good sex. Can you have uncomfortable conversations? What happens when one of your parents is old and needs to move in or needs help? What happens if there's an injury and you can't have sex? Like, it's just as important to explore the positive ends of the vows, so to speak, as like the what, for rich or poor, like the richness, the health, the abundance. Like, it's easy to be in a relationship when all those things are flowing. But if this is where I ask it, and I've been the maid of honor 3 times. I've given many a wedding speech on this, and this iteration usually comes out in some way that if you only got the negative, meaning the not great ends of the vows, the poverty, the sickness, and what have you, would you still pick that person? And would you still feel like they are destined to be with you, or then you could get through it and they're the love of your life? If that is indeed the case, that you think that you and they in return would be there for you if you were injured, if you were off work, if maybe mental, like COVID hit a lot of couples, mental health declined, kids' mental health, like, it's not just I'm in it with you when everything is great. How can you tend to me and tend to yourself? Do you tend to yourself when things aren't so great? And that's, from, in my view, from what I see in my couples that I work with and individuals who bring their relationship in through story, it's often the soulmate bubble is popped if they're not genuinely that, like, love of the life, when it's not that they did all these great things that I imagined they would do. It's they really let me down here. They dropped the ball when I needed them the most, and that's not something I would have expected from my soulmate. And it's those ruptures that are sometimes more irreparable, and that's where I have like the jaded like disillusionment of soulmate, because it's like, okay, of course your soulmate's gonna know your love language and buy you your favorite cupcake and do the easy things that are obvious to love you, but are they going to be there for you in a different way when times are tough? And times get tougher as we get older, especially for those of us in the sandwich generation. We're caring for kids, we're caring for parents. Like that was the case in 70s, 80s, and 90s too, that those sandwich generation didn't end then. Like, how are you going to be there for me when it's not the best parts of the vows? Also, I think indicates, is that person your soulmate or not?
Well said.
Yeah. So I think we can
mic drop
transition into my favorite, one of my favorite Am I the Assholes? Thank you, Reddit, by the way. You've made our content mining much easier.
Yes.
Am I the asshole for telling my wife not to tell her friends our business? Summary. We're not going to read the whole thing. You can read it if you want. We'll link it. A man is uncomfortable with his wife sharing personal details about their relationship with her friends, leading to a disagreement, understandably, about privacy. So, off the cuff, what are your thoughts on that? And then I have the few notes that we can talk about specifically. But
it's interesting because I work with a lot of dudes, a lot of males, and so this pops up a lot more than you might think. And so it could be a little off topic. I think it's on topic, but like when you talk about business, a lot of times, the things that I can see that just sort of cut my clients to the core is they'll find out that their wives are talking about their sex life with their best friends. And what's interesting is that I'm not saying that guys don't do locker room talk. They do. Not every guy does. But what's interesting is that like a lot of my male clients will come back quite hurt to find out that like they're actually their wife or a girlfriend may be actually talking about a level of dissatisfaction with their sexual performance.
You can only share it if it's good.
With people, yeah, exactly. With people that then the same partner, girlfriend, wife would be like, well, why don't you want to go hang out with them? Because you've just told them that like I'm packing an angry inch. Like, I don't know, like if
not really feeling confident
like,
in this interaction.
I'm not feeling that great that like this is what I know that you're talking about, or that you dislike certain aspects. And I think that's the not funny thing, but I think it's hypocritical that we can't think that body shaming also happens to men. Right? Because like it's funny when you hear about like Disney recasting certain roles because they don't want women to have poor body images, yet they totally cast Thor, right? Like there's wait a second, it goes both ways here, and I'm not saying that we can't be more attentive to it, but I think that you're not an asshole for saying, hey, I think there's certain things that you and I, honey, probably shouldn't talk about with other people along with family. Because what are we actually doing? When we're having these discussions, we're sort of recruiting people to join our side. And when we're looking for someone to join our side, that means that we're also asking them not to be on my significant other's side. And I think that's why there's a lot of times when you see like troubles happening in relationships, all of a sudden people are like, oh, I don't want to reunify, or I don't want to go through the process of putting this relationship back together. Not because there's an incompatibility in doing so, but because now they have to go back to their friends and family who they've sowed and poisoned the well with and say like, oh, actually he's not that big of an ass and he's not that abusive and he's not blah, blah, blah. Because I was actually just trying to get a concert of support around me to justify my own bullshit so I didn't have to feel bad about maybe equally having a hand in the destruction of this relationship.
Yeah, I don't think this person's the asshole. I think it's an interesting double standard that if it were braggadocious information, if we can call it that most there'd still be a reaction of like what you said that, but then they're like, I'm the man. Like just using this template of the wife shared about the husband, like this does maybe not go both ways, but like there's that was the first point, is like if it's a positive thing or speaks highly of the partner, usually people are not as upset when they find out the information was disclosed. unless it was an explicit thing of
Yeah.
not sharing. Like, I get that. Like, sex is usually one of those unspoken, but also does need to be spoken about, that it is an unspoken, like, this goes without saying, but after I say it, please don't share anything, whether it's good or bad, about our sex life. But if something were to escape, I think most partners would agree it'd rather be like something complimentary rather than dissatisfactory. That was my one point. The other point is the reason why gossip or sharing of certain material or secrets or what is supposed to be confidential in relationships exists, this happens in friendships too, is because it shows a certain, so this is not excusing it, this is just explaining the evolution of it, or where it comes from evolutionary psychology. There is a purpose for it, because it shows that I have trust, that other people can trust me because they gave me this confidential information. But then there's a gap in the instinct of sharing that, because then you're not realizing, in the same vein, you're showing how untrustworthy you are, that you're sharing that information. Like, you're only trustworthy that it's shared with you, but the way that you show that it's shared with you is by sharing it with other people. So it collapses in on itself. And most humans, specifically men, have the don't ask, don't tell, because it's that procreate, protect, provide. I'm not going to provide you information if it doesn't protect myself or the relationship. So they keep it even more clandestine. That for women, it's like, well, I was just telling your mother about this. And the guy's like, what the fuck are you doing talking to my mom about my erectile dysfunction? Like, Christina, that you can't do that. Like, well, why not? And it's because instinctually it's like, well, this is a social class. This is how we're in the same in group. It's showing that I'm not so perfect. Like, there's motivators, not excuses. There's motivators for it, that you have to have this clear understanding with your partner of what is appropriate and inappropriate, and with whom to discuss those topics about, and understand it does come from that instinct of, I'm sharing this because I think it makes the other person feel like I'm important or trustworthy. There's other ways to demonstrate that, first of all. Second of all, if you're sharing and your partner has explicitly told you, you're not the asshole, but you're also psychologically immature in the fact that you can't make the inference, this is probably not appropriate, and how would I feel if my partner shared this about me? And if your answer is I wouldn't care, then go date somebody who doesn't care. Don't co-opt somebody who does care into not caring and downplaying it, because I've seen that happen in partnerships, going both ways, guy to girl or girl to guy. And then the other piece of that is, if you are in a partnership and you knowingly cross the partner's boundary of, please don't share this information, and you've done it and you were like, oh, I just wasn't thinking, or I didn't think it was that big of a deal, you can also be surprised if the partner is hurt, betrayed, or chooses to end the relationship.
Correct. Like, it is interesting. Funny how you were talking about like the ED side, because that does pop up. No pun intended.
Well, it doesn't, but
but what's interesting is like, I've had partners come in like absolutely broken because they were talking about Hims prescriptions, or picking up Viagra or whatever, and there can be. I truly believe it's completely fine for the other partner to also have a level of frustration that this thing has occurred in this relationship, where there is some sort of ED issue, right? But what's interesting though is like, when we start like taking that passive aggressive action of then sharing information with other people in a way to use humor as a defense mechanism,
right.
When it's really completely at the expense of another individual. Like, we can talk about ED and chuckle, but no one like chuckles about pelvic floors collapsing, right? Or like premenopausal women or stuff like that. So there's just if you wouldn't want your significant other to be sharing something in the same context with their guys about like just how Sahara dry this chick is, then it's probably not good to share something that would equally be as embarrassing or impactful. Absolutely. For the sense of, really, you need to process this with your significant other. Like, why do we have these conversations so freely with people who have no ability to change anything or power,
especially
to have
if you're doing it complaining?
When it's like, no, why don't we actually talk together about that? And what's interesting,
why would we do that?
Fine. Well, it's kind of fun.
Why would we be healthy? Come on, Adam.
Well, so there's a a part of like the couples I work with is a lot of like sexual trauma. And so what's interesting about this is like what we're finding out more and more is that ED is really not a physiological issue. It's more of a psychological issue. And
True.
so uh, then what you end up having is you have someone who's again shamed for their emotions or their inability to control intrusive thoughts during an action. And so when we move into the spot of like, you do realize that like the gentleman in your life isn't inviting this in. Like it's just it
It's
actually
not that there's nothing wrong with him either. It should
exactly.
be treated as such. Like, hey, do you need help? Can I do anything different? Like,
Well,
it
because
should
there's
be looked
actually
at with support.
there's an emotional component here where like
Right.
here in the most physical vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
experience that one person can have, his mind can't
And
stay in the
yeah.
room. Like his
Mm-hmm.
mind is somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
there's this intervention that I use with my couples of like, and they always fail it, which it's supposed to be, they're supposed to fail it for a reason, which is I'm like, okay, well, do me a favor, both get naked, get in bed, and I
Mm-hmm.
want you to just sit there and I want you to caress each
Mm-hmm.
other. And then we'll
Mm-hmm.
just like do it.
Yeah. Put your party clothes on and go to the
Yeah,
party.
do that for
Yeah.
an hour. And then, if nothing happens, then
Let's see what
roll
comes
over and
up.
go to bed. And it's like,
Yeah.
it's weird they never make it the hour, right? Because it's a whole different way of how we sort of get ready for each other.
Experience.
Because I'm
Yeah.
telling you, there's more people that get naked while putting on invisible armor than we ever really want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So sure,
So true.
I pull out my assets and I put it in front of you, but guess what? I'm also layering up. And then we can talk about why the sex doesn't feel the same and why doesn't it feel the same? Because we're both in this performative state, or there's one of us that feels extorted in this state. There's another one that feels shameful for asking for this state. So like I know this is off topic, but it comes back to that like we have to be careful what information we share with friends and family when in reality we need to be
Yep.
sharing that with our significant other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think it also ties into that felt sense of closeness with soulmates too, because some people would have it like, well, my soulmate would never fill in the blank. And that is one trend I think is helpful on social media that I've seen is are you struggling with like, is the person you're with like the one,
Yeah.
or like, do you want to be with them long term? It's filling that in of like I've seen it go both ways. Like my wife would never,
Yeah.
or my husband would never, like insert the behavior that you're questioning in the relationship. And if you, whether you want to be married or not,
True.
if you filtered of like, would I want to spend the rest of my life with somebody who's been capable, shown me they're capable of this at least multiple times? It's like, no. So
Yeah.
it also goes with, if this is the first time you're able to make the repair for this, neither of you are the asshole. If it was truly, I didn't know that this would hurt you, I understand, I should have known that, I will learn from the future to keep you in mind whenever making a decision. Please forgive. Like, if you can repair past this, I think this is healthy and you're not the asshole. If you're continually doing this and you don't have respect for your partner and you don't think they have feelings, which often women think rather that when men don't have feelings, you have them in ways that we don't even know, and more depth that you might not even know because of the societal conditioning. It's not appropriate to share certain things about either partner, especially when they have told you, please don't do that. So if you did that under that circumstance, you are the asshole.
Oh yeah. You're a giant douche canoe.
Yeah. So you deserve to be on Reddit. The last segment of this episode is host. Well, when I chatted it in, it auto-corrected to host hottest. So
please
the
rate us.
battle is out. Yeah, please rate us.
Yeah.
Not the episode, us.
Yeah. I'm number one.
You know how people say like,
Talia
review, subscribe. 2. Yeah.
Post
rate
those
the hottest
under
host.
it, please.
Please, multiple times.
So,
it's supposed to be the host hot seat. So we will take it like that. Thank you, autocorrect. And this is something we joked about off air. So you can go like off the cuff. There's no limit, obviously. I mean, there has to be. I would be here all day. I have a lot of things that irritate me. But what immediately makes you think less of somebody? What we had said is if somebody has a certain name of somebody we don't like.
And we both said
that
the
immediately,
same name.
I mean, yeah.
Not an issue.
Oh my God, twin flame.
Yeah, exactly. No, yep. You're my soulmate in trauma.
Yep. Exactly.
So let's see
besties.
here.
Trauma besties.
Trauma besties. Let's see. Would that be trauma bonsties? I think that'd be trauma bonsties right there.
I'm in. Hashtag
trauma bonsties. Oh, what makes you immediately think less of someone? I struggle with straight up arrogance.
Mm,
Like it's hard for me to actually push past like wanting to get to know a person once they show up and they're just cocky and
hmm.
they're, it just at that point I'm done. And I think that like the only caveat I can put on top of that is like probably moving into individuals that have cheated on their wives. Like if you'll cheat on your significant other, um, then what grounds do I have to believe that you would do me better?
Any
Yeah.
differently? Yeah.
So like,
Yeah. What won't you do?
no, I mean that just came from a mentor a long time ago that said that he didn't do business deals with people that had cheated on their wives
Good.
because he said, you
Good.
know what, if they're willing to do that with the mother of their children in most cases, like I can't
What
expect
wouldn't
them
they?
to
Yeah.
treat me any better.
Mm-mm. No, I wouldn't put my money in bed with someone like that. Yeah. No. What there's a long list. Immediately makes me think less of somebody, any type of abuse or mistreatment of animals,
Oof.
children or people.
Wood
Number
chipper.
one trigger. It's also because of my core value of like justice
Yeah.
and treatment, like proper treatment and infants and children and dogs and like any animal, but I'm a really big dog person. But any animal being abused or hurt or a child, it's like that
Yeah.
exercising your power over somebody that's helpless or like they're littler than you, they're not less than you is
Yeah.
always what I say. Like that's just very immature. That immediately makes me think less of
Mm,
somebody. There was one other one that I had off the top of my head besides the name thing. Like there's the more surface ones. There's the deep core value ties. Probably if they're inconsiderate, it's being inconsiderate in a way that isn't like they just didn't know any better because they weren't taught or they weren't
mm,
educated on it. Like willful ignorance or being inconsiderate is much different than like if I broke a law I didn't know existed, I'm not going to hold myself
yeah.
accountable for that. It's like I literally didn't know. Like I'm sorry, but I feel like what immediately makes me think less is like you knew better
Mm,
and you still chose like the cheating thing. Like you knew what the consequence
yep.
was. There's no way you didn't. That's a like and if you didn't, then what rock have you been living under that like doing X
Mm,
behavior is obviously not going to go well and will in that case rupture the person's ability to trust that whole species, the whole gender for the
yeah.
rest of their lives. Like it's not even just that one cut, it's the scarring that leaves the person with. That's what would immediately make me think less of
Yeah.
somebody is like you are inconsiderate and you
Hmm.
willfully were inconsiderate of somebody else, and if it ruptures again that view of that person's ability to view whatever the
Yeah.
role that you had in their life was, yeah, I have a problem with that, I would say. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. I know there are some, and I used to have a list of pet peeves, but I think this is separate from a pet peeve. And this isn't supposed to say like a one up, one down, but like
No.
to speak to people who are like, how could a therapist think we're people
Mm,
first? We were trained to be a therapist, and anybody would be. Do you use a customer service voice at times? Yes. Like you show up differently in different arenas of your life because that's the way society has to function and
yeah.
that's the way relationships grow. We are allowed to, even as therapists, think less of people. That doesn't mean that if I had a client that came in, I've worked with infidelity in a clinical sense. That's where my clinical hat is on. That is not to say it translates into I think less.
Yeah.
However, if it's a serial cheater who has no remorse and has no plans, I do think less of you and I wouldn't work with you and I'd refer you out appropriately and we wouldn't even have more than one or two, maybe if it came out sessions, because I know that's my own
Mm,
limitation that wouldn't allow me to effectively treat what was at
yeah.
stake. And also it's therapy interfering behavior. We like if there's active DV, active affairs, or active substance use that's untreated, we can't see you as a couple. We'd be doing more harm than good.
Yeah.
So there's like a caveat there that just because that exists in my personal life doesn't always translate to my professional life. And if it does, I don't take that kind of client. I'm very diligent about the ethics of it. I would never accept a
Yep.
client if I already knew there was going to be such a values collision rather
Yeah.
than a values elision where we're aligned. I wouldn't even begin the professional relationship if I were already, even by
Mm,
reading whatever they wrote in, be like, I can't, I would have too much judgment, again, because we're a
yep.
person, to even treat them effectively. And that's quality care, is knowing when your humanness is going to
Oh
bump up
yeah.
against another person's
If you've
human.
never referred a client away, you've got issues. Sorry.
I
And
don't
and
trust that.
and
Yeah.
I'm sorry I said it that way, but it's the
Yeah.
truth. Like
Yeah.
that's why a lot of times sometimes I'll have clients that will get surprised when they'll make a referral, and they
Mhm.
don't hear it from me, but they hear it from the
Mhm.
friend that I didn't take them,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And then inevitably they always try to push up on the boundaries. And again, it's always
Why?
like, I don't talk
Yeah.
about anyone that I sit with, but it is
Potential or
interesting
real, yeah.
because it's good to also remind your clients that, like, I'm not stuck with you. So at
No.
some point in time,
Neither of us are stuck with each other.
like, if you're not making any growth, if we're not hitting the goals in the treatment
Yeah.
plan, I'm actually ethically called to, like, tell you you need to go find someone better because I'm obviously
Mhm.
not your flavor of ice cream.
Mhm.
So
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad that we touched on that because I didn't rather I wanted to get ahead of people hearing that and being like, but what, you're a this. It's like, yeah, that doesn't exempt us from being a
no.
person, and we're not supposed to, as much as psychology today says otherwise, treat everybody with a warm, empathetic, non-judgmental environment. No, like, there are people we're not a good match for, and if it's a human as a person, if it's something I would immediately think less of, you will never be my client, and that's a gift to you, and that's a gift to the profession, because if I'm not the right one or you're not the right one, there is a therapist who might be like, that is something that doesn't collide with me. I'm in it, and if that's their specialty, I want them to have that client. I want everybody to get good quality care, and that means that therapists have to be more diligent about who they refer in or out. And if it is this hot seat of, if your clients are people you immediately think less of, it's not going to be good work at all. So yes, that is probably what we will leave you with. I think that feels like a good end note. Please rate us, rank our hotness, just like ratemyprofessor.com,
Yeah.
which really, if you say it fast, sounds really bad. So they should have changed the title of that website, because I said it in class one time and this kid raises his hand. He goes, "Did you just say?" I said, no, rate with a T. And he goes, "Oh, okay." He was like really off put by the name for it. So yeah, give us a chili pepper. They used to do that back in the day. I've been a professor for a while. But really, if you like these episodes, like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast, share the episodes, tell us what you liked or didn't like. We are equally excited in both directions to hear, what works for you or what riled you up, because that's our thing. It's like hot takes on hot topics. So we'll be back in a couple weeks to rile you up some more.
Thank you for every single one of you who has liked our Instagram posts
Yes,
and shared
thank
our
you.
Instagram posts. It is very helpful to us. So thank you so much.
Yeah, we look forward to more, and it does warm my heart when people comment and they're like, "Thank you for
Yeah.
talking about this. I needed to hear this," even if it's more of a dividing comment, because sometimes people are like, "What? Why would you post that?" And then there's other people. It takes care of itself. Our comment section is like a self-cleaning oven. I've seen people go in and be like, "Well, that's small-minded." Well, and I'm like, "Well, I don't have to say anything. This is great." So thank you, and please participate. And yeah, any episodes you want us to do, just message us. I'm at Talia Bombola.
I'm at
Adam
Wild
Bacon,
Ethos Counseling.
and we'll see you next time.
Next time.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Between Two Clinicians. We would so appreciate if this episode resonated with you, for you to share it with somebody, and also find your favorite podcast platform and like, rate, and subscribe to the podcast. We would love to attract more listeners just like you and have this message be spread to whoever needs it. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.